Okay, I'm going to read one more chapter today in our Nancy Drew, The Clue in the Crumbling Wall. And this chapter is chapter 15, Behind the Door. So you were eavesdropping, Mr. Drew sternly accused the man who had been listening at the door as he pulled him roughly to his feet. No, that's not true, the fellow stammered. Recovering his balance, he tried to retreat. Mr. Drew blocked the doorway. Sit down, he ordered. We want to talk to you. Nancy was glad her father intended to question the man. She recognized him as the one who had followed her. What were you doing at the door? Mr. Drew asked him sharply. Nothing, he replied in a sullen voice. I thought this room belonged to a friend of mine. I'm afraid that's rather hard to believe, for you had your ear to the keyhole when I opened the door. Tell me your name. It's none of your business. I can turn you over to the police. And I can report to them that you trailed me today, said Nancy. The stranger looked worried and squirmed uneasily in the chair. You can't prove it. This man followed you today? Mr. Drew questioned his daughter in surprise. Yes, I forgot to tell you about it. Then that settles it, the lawyer announced grimly. We'll turn this fellow over to the police for questioning. No, don't do that. I'll tell you anything you want to know except my name. The eavesdropper could not know that Mr. Drew's threat to call the police was only a bluff. Very well, nodded the lawyer. Why were you following my daughter this afternoon? I followed her because I was paid a good wad to do it. By whom? I'm not saying. Anyhow, I don't know the guy's name. What were your instructions? The fellow hung his head and refused to reply until the lawyer referred again to the police. I was told to make a complete report on where she went, who she talked to, and what she did. Mr. Drew turned so that the man could not see him. With a quick movement of his hand and a jerk of his eyebrows, he signaled for Nancy to step into her bedroom. For a moment, the girl was puzzled. Then it dawned upon her that her father probably wanted her to slip quietly downstairs and make arrangements to have the stranger trailed. So you won't tell us your name, Mr. Drew repeated, gazing significantly at Nancy. No, I won't, the man retorted. Nancy stole noiselessly from the room. Hastening downstairs, she used one of the public telephones to call the police station. Identifying her father and herself, she said, Please send a plainclothes detective at once. I'll meet him in the lobby here and explain everything to him when he arrives. How will I know him? Oh, here's another little instance here of some language that we would see changed. I'm going to say this. I'm going to edit it as I've been doing throughout all the other chapters that I've been reading. He'll pretend to be disabled. There's a lot of references, although they're not nice references, to disability in here. But they're not, obviously, they're not done with sensitivity and they're problematic. Nancy was worried lest the detective might not reach the hotel in time. In less than 5 minutes, however, a man who was limping walked in. The Drew girl told him why he had been called. She asked that he trail the eavesdropper when he should leave the hotel. Here he comes now, she whispered, as the brown-suited stranger emerged from an elevator. I'll get out of sight. He mustn't see me. Nancy secreted herself behind a pillar. She was pleased to observe that when the detective followed the culprit from the hotel, the latter appeared to be unaware of it. I hope that's what Dad expected me to do, Nancy thought, stepping into the elevator. Mr. Drew was waiting at the door to his room. He assured his daughter that she had interpreted his signals correctly. The stranger, he reported, had been too nervous to notice the girl's absence. By the way, Mr. Drew asked as they sat down, have you telephoned to Mrs. Gruen since we left home, Nancy? There may be messages for us. The girl admitted that she had forgotten to do so. You'd better put in a long-distance call right away, her father urged. The call was placed, and after a brief interval, Nancy heard Hannah's familiar voice. How glad I am you phoned, she said at once. I tried to reach you at Hampton, but the hotel clerk said you had left. Is anything wrong? Mrs. Fenimore was here this morning. She wanted to see you very much. Mrs. Fenimore? Nancy echoed in surprise. Knowing that the disabled woman seldom left her cottage, she realized that only an urgent matter would have prompted the woman to undertake the trip. "She wouldn't explain why she came," Mrs. Gruen resumed. "When I told her you weren't at home, she said you must be warned to be careful." "Careful of what?" "She seemed to think you're in danger. Oh, Nancy, I'll be so relieved when you're home again, safe and sound." "We'll be back tomorrow," the girl reassured the housekeeper. "Don't worry about me." Nancy speculated as to why Mrs. Fenimore considered her to be in danger. Could the woman have learned that she was to be shadowed by the mysterious man in brown? Nancy and Mr. Drew waited until midnight for a report from the plainclothesman. When he failed to return to the hotel, they telephoned police headquarters. The detective had not checked in yet. In the morning, there was still no word, so Mr. Drew requested that a full report of the matter be forwarded to him at River Heights. Nancy lost no time in calling at the Fenimore cottage after she arrived home the next afternoon. The woman was reclining on a couch, exhausted from the strain and worry of the previous day. "I shouldn't have allowed myself to become so upset," she said to Nancy after she had greeted the girl. "Oh, this is Mrs. Fenimore? Okay. But Hector Keep always affects me that way." "Then he came here to see you?" "I had a dreadful session with him. He asked me so many questions." "About your sister?" "Yes, he wanted to know if I had engaged anyone to search for Floriana." "Did you mention my name?" "Well, I did say you had offered to help me," Mrs. Fenimore admitted, though I felt unhappy about having told him. "From the way Mr. Keep acted, I'm sure he intends to make trouble for you." "I'm not afraid of Hector Keep," Nancy said defiantly. "Oh, but you should have heard him talk. He said he wouldn't let anyone meddle in his affairs. He seems to think Heathcastle belongs to him." "Mr. Keep is worried," Nancy commented, frowning. "His remarks make it perfectly clear to me that he has a guilty conscience." "Will you risk going to Heathcastle again?" "I'll certainly return there if it will accomplish anything," Nancy said with determination, "but I believe the mystery may be solved in another way." She thought it best not to tell Mrs. Fenimore about the possibility that her sister might have been disabled as a result of an automobile accident. She merely said there was an interesting new lead to follow, one which would not involve her coming in contact with the troublesome Mr. Keep. Immediately upon returning home, Nancy took stock of the mystery. Thieves probably were prowling around the Heath grounds looking for something important. Did it have anything to do with Floriana? Was Hector Keep up to some underhanded work in connection with it? And then there's Emily Foster and the man who was eavesdropping. As Nancy opened the top drawer of her bureau to get a handkerchief, she spied the torn half-note she had found in the debris at the Heath factory. In the recent excitement, she had forgotten all about it. "This may turn out to be my most valuable clue," she berated herself. "I must try to figure it out." She sat down at once to piece out the message, but had hardly started when the telephone rang. The caller was George, wanting to know how the solution to the mystery was progressing. "I have a clue to your stolen clothes," the Drew girl laughed, and told of having seen the shirt similar to George's on Mrs. Hooker's clothesline. "Why, the nerve of that woman!" her chum exclaimed indignantly. "I'm going there at once and demanding that she give up my property." "You can't prove anything, George," Nancy discouraged her. "Better forget the matter for the time being and come over here. I have lots to tell you. Bring Bess along." "Be there pronto," George replied. As Nancy returned to her room, she said to herself, if it was Jetty who took the clothes, what was he doing in Heath Gardens? Is it possible that boy is connected with the mystery? She was still trying to figure this out when the other girls arrived. Nancy told them everything that had happened on the trip with her father. "Poor Floriana!" Bess exclaimed. "How dreadful for a wonderful dancer to have her career cut off that way." "I wish you could have found that nurse, Emily Foster," George added, "but maybe she isn't even alive today." "Well, what are you going to work on next, Nancy?" "This note, or rather this piece of note." She produced the bit of paper, and together the girls pored over it for some time, each with a pencil and a paper, trying to fill out lines to form a logical message. Bess was the first one to claim having pieced together the missing words. "Listen to this," she cried gleefully. "I have it." "Let's hear it," urged Nancy. "Dear C, someplace is the secret which I hid in a wall. I want to be famous. If I find it, it will be a worthy work." George scoffed. "Nobody would write a note with such uneven lines. And we know already something is hidden in the wall." "Well, it fills in the missing words," Bess defended herself. "One guess is as good as another," Nancy said kindly. For some little time, the three girls continued their deciphering. At least, Bess and George did. Nancy, meanwhile, fell to dreaming. Suddenly, she jumped up from her chair, saying, "The solution to this mystery might lie in this very house." Without explaining her strange remark, she ran from the room and down the stairs. In a few minutes, she returned carrying a large book. "How in the world are you going to find Floriana with that?" asked George. What Nancy held was a portfolio of colored pictures and descriptions of famous old houses and gardens in England. Ooh. Knowing of the girl's interest in gardening, a cousin of Nancy's had sent the book to her several Christmases before. "I forgot I had these pictures," she said, quickly turning the leaves. "Girls, look here." "Heath Castle!" exclaimed George. "The original one in England!" "Only, of course, it wasn't called Heath." "And the gardens!" cried Bess, as they looked at picture after picture. Nancy was busy reading the description of them, when suddenly a paragraph caught her eye. "Oh, George, Bess, listen to this! At last, I think we have the clue we've been looking for." This is a good chapter. I want to read the next one, but I'm going to stop. The Heath Gardens. There are multiple gardens. It's like Kew Gardens. All right, that was good.